evening, everyone. We're going to be starting momentarily. We're just going to wait for folks to file on in from the waiting room. So we'll be starting in about 30 seconds or so. Just going to give it a few more seconds here. We were expecting a large crowd, and we want to make sure everyone gets in from the waiting room before we begin. And while we're waiting for the waiting room to file out here, for those who feel comfortable doing so, no obligation, no pressure. But for those who are comfortable doing so, as an icebreaker, why don't you let us know in the chat where you're joining us from? So let us know what city or town or state you are watching us from tonight. And again, if you don't want to reveal your location, that's certainly fine. But for those that do, let us know where you're joining us from tonight. And a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get going. I did want to let folks know that I'm recording tonight's presentation, and I will share the link to this recording via email tomorrow morning. So if you want to pass this along to anyone you know who might be interested in this topic, you'll be able to do so with the link that I send you tomorrow morning. And just know we're in Zoom webinar mode, so Bettye nor myself can see you or hear you. And obviously the recording is just going to capture Bettye and her presentation. It won't capture any of your faces at home. And because we cannot see you or hear you, if you have any questions or comments for Bettye, you're going to want to type those into the chat and into the Q&A. We've designated approximately 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A at the end of the program. I believe, just to set expectations, the program is going to last approximately an hour. Bettye will speak for roughly 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll take roughly 15 to 20 minutes or so of questions. So again, questions go in the Q&A, and any comments go into the chat. And I guess that's about it. In that email tomorrow morning, you'll get a link to a feedback survey. Please fill that out. Let us know what you thought of tonight's event and what you'd like to see for future events here at the library. I did quickly want to thank two organizations. So this event tonight is sponsored by the Friends of the Tewksbury Public Library. As always, we're deeply appreciative of them. And I also wanted to thank a collaboration that my library is involved in entitled Libraries Working Towards Social Justice. We have booked a lot of programs this month in particular for Black History Month, but also we have programs year-long this year focused on equity and inclusion and diversity. And there'll be more about those programs in the email you receive tomorrow morning. But I want to thank the Libraries Working Towards Social Justice for helping promote tonight's event. All right, let me get to the good stuff here. Oh, and then I should also mention, for those in the audience that are members of our library's regular genealogy group, just know that tonight's program is serving as our monthly meeting. So we'll get back to our regular format next month. But I did want to acknowledge and thank those in the audience who are members of the Tewksbury genealogy group. And I think you're really going to enjoy tonight's talk. Okay, so now let's get to the good stuff. Tonight's program is entitled The Lost History of President James Madison's Black Family. According to the oral history passed down through 8 generations of her family, retired pediatrician Bettye Kearse is a descendant of the enslaved cook Coreen and her enslaver and half-brother President James Madison. Dr. Kearse tells her family story in the acclaimed memoir, The Other Madisons, The Lost Story of a President's Black Family, which is also the subject of a soon-to-be released documentary film. And I guess it just premiered locally this past weekend. So we're going to join Bettye to learn what it means to be an African-American descendant of a slaveholding president and how that meaning evolved over 8 generations of her family. Bettye will also discuss the obstacles, both internal and external, she confronted while becoming her family's oral historian, determined to tell its whole story. The Other Madisons has garnered strong reader and editorial reviews. It earned an International Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society Book Award for nonfiction and was listed by Smithsonian Magazine as one of the top 10 history books of 2020 and by Kirkus Review as one of the best nonfiction books of 2020. So everyone here with us live, and I'm sure the hundreds that will be watching on demand, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Bettye for joining us here tonight. And Bettye, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert, for giving me this opportunity to tell the members of the Tewksbury genealogical group and guests about the research for my book, The Other Madisons. The title of my talk is The Other Madisons: In Search of the President's Black Son. Griots, women, and griots, men, carry forth the stories of their ancestors. For thousands of years, possibly before the birth of Christ, generations of West African griots and griots have served as human links between past and present by speaking the stories of their ancestors and the history of their people. They shape how each person sees himself in the present and in the continuum of past and future. Their words preserve entire cultures. And when Africans were kidnapped and enslaved, they did not leave their tradition of oral history behind. For many African American families like mine, this tradition is all that preserves the legacies our ancestors left for us. Without it, I would not know that I'm a descendant of the enslaved cook Coreen and her enslaver and half-brother, President James Madison. This is the Madison family tree, and the griots and griots are shaded. The story of my ancestors in America goes back to 1653, when President Madison's great-great-grandfather, John Madison, spelled with 2 Ds, left England to take advantage of the headright system in America. Through this system, he received 50 acres for himself and for each of the 11 indentured servants he brought with him. He turned his 600 acres in the Tidewater area of Virginia into a tobacco farm. But tobacco quickly depletes the soil. So when his grandsons wanted to purchase their own land or to have their own farms, they had to move further inland. One of them, Ambrose, chose the Piedmont area and arrived there with his wife, a son, and 2 daughters in the spring of 1732. But a few months later, Ambrose was dead, poisoned by 3 enslaved people. 2 of them, Dido, a woman, and Turk, a man, were enslaved by Ambrose himself. The third, Pompey, was from a nearby plantation. Dido and Turk received 29 lashes each and then were sent back to work on the tobacco plantation. But Pompey was hanged. This was the first documented murder in Virginia of an enslaver by his own enslaved people. My family's first African ancestor in America, and our first griot, and my 5 greats grandmother was a stolen woman called Mandy. The oral history that Mandy passed down was that she was stolen from the shore near her village in Ghana, carried across the ocean in the bowels of a wretched ship, shoved onto an auction block, sold, put to work in a small cotton field in a remote corner of a big tobacco farm, and then raped by her enslaver, James Madison Sr. A baby girl was born through those forced encounters. Mandy named her Coreen. The date of Coreen's birth is unknown, but it is known that on March 16th, 1751, James Sr.'s wife, Nellie Conway Madison, gave birth to a son. The first of the couple's 12 children was named James Jr., or as they affectionately called him, Jimmy. Thus, the child born through rape, destined to live entrapped in slavery, and the child born through marriage, destined to become the fourth president of a new nation, were half siblings. According to the history told by the 8 generations of my family's American griots and griots, James Jr. became attracted to Coreen, who by then was a cook known for her apple pies. Around 1792, that attraction led to the birth of a son. Coreen called him Jim. He was my great, great, great grandfather. Shortly after the War of 1812, Madison's wife, Dolly, having learned that Jim and one of her nieces were in love, sold Jim. His father stood by and watched. As Jim was being taken away, Coreen, my family's second griot, pleaded with Jim, "Always remember, you're a Madison." She believed the name could help them find each other someday, but they never saw each other again. Jim, our third griot, probably ended up in Tennessee. This 19th century drawing from Lewis Miller's Sketchbook of landscapes in the state of Virginia shows 2 white men on horseback forcing a coffle of enslaved people to walk to Tennessee from Augusta County, Virginia, which is about 25 miles from Orange County, where Madison's plantation, Montpelier, sits. The poem here reads, "Arise, arise, and weep no more. Dry up your tears. We shall part no more. Come, rose we go to Tennessee, that happy shore. To old Virginia, never, never return." The lower inscription seems to describe an event the artist had witnessed and at least explain some of the irony of the poem. It says, "The company going from Staunton, Augusta County to Tennessee, the law of Virginia suffered them go on. I was astonished by this boldness. The carrier stopped a moment, then ordered the march. I saw the ploy. It is commonly in this state, with the Negroes in droves sold." Jim was likely on such a trek, but he never forgot his mother's words. And as he passed them on to his children and told them to tell their children that they are Madisons, words were added, and Coreen's plea became my family's credo, the guiding statement that we have lived by for more than 200 years. After my enslaved ancestors, by then living in Texas, learned they were free, they could use the name as more than a tool to find torn away loved ones. Now they could use the name as a source of inspiration. Jim's son, Emmanuel, my great-great-grandfather, taught his children to be proud that their names had come from a president and to make the most of that legacy now that they had the chance. Emmanuel, our fourth griot, changed the credo to always remember, you're a Madison, you come from a president. According to various records, Emmanuel and his wife Elizabeth had at least 14 children, but only 8 all males appear on the 1860 census. The fate of the others is unknown. One of the 8 was my great-grandfather, Mac, our 5th griot. He married Martha Murchison Strain, the daughter of Mahala Murchison. My great-great-grandmother, Mahala, is historically significant because at the age of 10, she became the first Black resident of Austin, Texas, when she arrived there in July 1839 with her enslavers, Alexander Murchison and his family. Austin had been founded only 4 months earlier, and Mahala remained the only Black person in the city for nearly 10 years. Going back to Mac's side, the youngest of Mac and Martha's 3 sons was John Chester, my beloved Gramps, who was born free. Gramps was proud that his father, grandfather, and other enslaved ancestors had overcome enslavement. He wanted his children to know that enslaved people were remarkable individuals who possessed inner strength and a sense of hope by which they survived, and many talents by which they contributed tremendously to America. Gramps, my family's 6th griot, added 2 important words to the credo: African slaves. The credo became, always remember, you're a Madison. You come from African slaves and a president. So for the last 100 years, the credo has reminded us that we aren't just descendants of a president, we are descendants of enslaved people too. In 1990, when my mother, our 7th generation griot, turned over to me the old cardboard box of family memorabilia, I became the 8th generation griot. When I asked her why now, she answered in her slight Texan drawl, I want to give you plenty of time to write the book. In order to become the griot and to write the book, I decided I needed to try to find my ancestors who had lived the evolution of our guiding credo. Here are those ancestors. Coreen, who started the credo. Jim, who remembered his mother's words. Emmanuel, who used the credo to inspire his children. Mac, who put the credo and its inspiration into action, and John Chester, who revered his enslaved ancestors. Starting backwards in time, Gramps was easy to find. The box of family memorabilia contains newspaper clippings about his teenager and his tenure as a teacher in Elgin, Texas, and later as a principal in Navasota, Texas. And the box contains pictures of him at various ages. Mac and Martha had 10 children, but only 5 of them lived to adulthood. This picture is a composite. Gramps is standing on the right, his eldest brother, Charlie, on the left. A few years before this picture was taken, Charlie and a bunch of his friends got into a scuffle with a group of white men, one of whom was killed. Though no one knew who was responsible for the death, Charlie and his friends left town immediately. They were afraid they would be jailed or lynched. Charlie fled to Denison, Texas, about 200 miles away, and changed his name to John Miller. He kept in touch with his family, but never went near Elgin again, where this photo of his siblings, Laura, Ruth, Moody, and John Chester, was taken around 1905. For Gramps, born in 1882, Coreen's admonition echoed loud in his mind and heart until his death in 1960. As a teenager, Gramps had dreamed of becoming a doctor, and he had a plan. While picking cotton and working odd jobs, he would earn a teaching degree, save every penny, and then attend medical school. He did not foresee that jobs were so limited and the pay so meager, it would take nearly 20 years for him to earn a bachelor's degree in agriculture. He did not get to medical school. The box also contains evidence of Gramps's father's life, including land deeds and land sales. In 1874, my great-grandfather, Mac, paid $192 in gold for 96 acres. The following year, he turned around and sold it for $384. My mother inherited my great-grandfather's way with money. Still going backwards on the tree, I found my great-great-grandfather Emmanuel's name on the 1934 bill of sale that documented his enslaver's purchase of a wife for Emmanuel. Her name was Elizabeth. This is my favorite picture from the box, and I carry it with me in my wallet at all times. I found Coreen when I went to Montpelier and walked literally in her footsteps as I stepped along the 70-foot path of bare soil that led from the rear of the Madison mansion to an excavation site of the 18th century kitchen where Coreen had worked. The path had been worn into the ground by generations of enslaved cooks serving the Madisons and their many and frequent guests. and I even found Coreen's mother, Mandy, when I knelt beside and touched a crude headstone nestled at the base of a tree in Montpelier's slave cemetery. But I could not find Jim. Slaves were often not identified by name in documents, and a surprising number of courthouses had lost records in fires. And Montpelier had no record of Jim's sale, possibly because both James and Dolly had requested their private papers be burned when they died. And Dolly's errant son by a prior marriage, Payne Todd, paid off his gambling debts by selling documents that included Madison's signature. And furthermore, perhaps Jim's new owner had changed Jim's name. So I joined forces with two of my cousins, Jimmy Madison and Sean Harley. From oral history, we knew that one of Jim's sons was our ancestor, Emmanuel. And from tax records, we learned that by the 1820s, Emmanuel lived in Tennessee as the property of Jephthah Billingsley. When Jimmy and Sean found documentation of an emancipated Black man named Shadrach Madison, we were excited. A possible lead to Jim had emerged. Until Shadrach gained his freedom sometime before 1816, but not recorded until 1817, he had been the property of another member of the Billingsley family, Jephthah's father, Samuel. There were more leads. Jim, according to the family stories, was born at Montpelier around 1792. Shadrach, according to the 1830 census, was born in Virginia in 1792. And Montpelier records from 1782 and 1786 list the common name Shadrach among property inventories and on an 1887 list of shoe sizes for enslaved people. Here is Shadrach's name between the two red blobs. It is possible that the younger emancipated man was the namesake of the older enslaved man. Another possible link between Emmanuel and Shadrach came from records in Gibson County, Tennessee. Both men lived there for some 20 years, roughly between 1828 and 1848. County tax records show that in the 1820s and 30s, Jephthah Billingsley owned one taxable slave. In 1834, Jephthah purchased a wife for that slave. The bill of sale identifies the male slave as Manuel, my great-great-grandfather. This slide on the left, this slide shows what the original document looked like. And it took several people, including two lawyers, to kind of translate, transcribe, interpret what the document was saying, which is here on the right. Here, Elizabeth is called Betsy and Emmanuel is called Manuel, but this is a special and unusual document. When I received a copy, the consideration enslavers had given to their property surprised me. King had agreed to furnish Elizabeth and increases with good clothing. Furthermore, at the end of 1 year, the enslaved couple could decide whether they wanted to live with King or with Billingsley, and more significantly, whether they wanted to live with each other. Elizabeth and Emmanuel chose to stay together. So this document is tantamount to a marriage certificate, a rare find for any African American trying to delve into the lives of their enslaved ancestors. Though this document does not free them, my ancestors, contrary to the standards of that time and place, had almost been treated like human beings with some measure of personal rights. Meanwhile, Shadrach, in 1828, after living in Bledsoe County, Tennessee, for at least the prior 11 years, and having just purchased land there from yet another Billingsley, Jephthah's mother, Mary, sold the land and moved to Gibson County, leaving his wife and children behind. He later purchased their freedom from Mary and brought them to Gibson County. He bought land in Gibson County and established a ferry service across the South Fork of the Obion River in a town that's now called Skullbone. The year 1848 was a turning point for both men. That year, Jephthah shipped Emmanuel and his family off to Texas. Jephthah's son, Jesse Billingsley, famous for being a renowned engine fighter, for serving in the House of Representatives of the First Congress of the Republic of Texas, and for coining the famous battle cry, "Remember the Alamo," during the Battle of San Jacinto in 1836, had given Jephthah hundreds of acres of prime cotton growing land. And Jephthah needed able bodies to work the soil. For the rest of their lives, Emmanuel and his family thanked God they had not been torn apart. Jesse Billingsley was a fascinating character, straight out of the lore of the Wild West. He often wore a buckskin suit he had stolen off the body of a Native American he had killed, slept on the floor of the State House while he was a congressman, and when he died, his family learned that he wanted to be buried in the front yard of his house with a parrot and his horse, Gopher. The family complied. But the main reason I mention Jesse is because he owned my family at the time of emancipation. This is the slave schedule of the 1860 census. It shows that by then, Jephthah Billingsley had transferred ownership of my family to his son. Jephthah transferred ownership of my family to his son Jesse. And it lists my family by approximate ages. These names here and these dates here were put there by my mother. Their names and their birth years. She was pointing out that our ancestors were not mere items. Now let's get back to 1848 and back to Shadrach. That year, Shadrach sold his land in Gibson County, and by the 1850 census was residing in White County, Illinois. Shadrach had been a free man in a slave state for at least 30 years. But now he no longer felt compelled to stay. Perhaps he had moved to Gibson County in 1828 in order to live near Emmanuel and his family, but now they were gone. It seems that either Shadrach did not know their whereabouts or chose not to uproot himself and his family again for life in another slave state. The final and most significant clue that there was a close connection between Emmanuel and Shadrach is their surname. When they were emancipated, Shadrach, by a document they recorded in 1817, and Emmanuel by the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, neither man took their enslaver's last name, Billingsley. Instead, both took the name I believe was chosen to honor their family's credo, Madison. Could it be that Shadrach Madison was Emmanuel Madison's father and Coreen's son? Could it be that Shadrach was our long lost Jim? Let's take a look at this comparative timeline for Emmanuel and Shadrach. It shows that Emmanuel's father, Jim, was born in Virginia at Montpelier around 1792. Shadrach was born in Virginia in 1792. Both were owned by members of the Billingsley family. Emmanuel by Jephthah and Shadrach by Jephthah's father, Samuel. Both lived in Gibson County, Tennessee around the same time, and both left Gibson County, Tennessee in 1848. And both, when they were freed, took the surname Madison. In October 2017, I participated in a symposium called Universities, Slavery, Public Memory, and the Built Landscape at the University of Virginia. I was on a panel called Voices of Descendants, a Conversation. I described my family's history and our possible relationship to Shadrach Madison. When the discussion ended, a staff member from Montpelier introduced me to a young man, named Marvin Alonzo Greer. He is a descendant of Shadrach Madison. We stayed in touch, and about 3 years later, DNA analysis revealed that we are, in fact, cousins. Now the task is to find Shadrach's father. Thank you.
Bettye, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. So folks, we have about 15 minutes or so for questions. If you have questions, please get them into the Q&A. And Bettye, I'll start relaying some questions to you here. First question comes from Christopher. Did President Madison know that Coreen was his half-sister and that her son was also his? And did Madison ever acknowledge or show favor to this son?
He did travel a lot, but the plantation is a close community. And so I feel certain that he did know that Coreen was his half-sister. And he probably knew that, Jim was his son. One of the things that my mother liked to point to is that he allowed Jim to learn to read. And so she feels that was the way that he was showing his love for his son, but still he allowed him to be sold.
Christopher would also like to know, why do you think that the Jefferson Hemings story is so much better known, and I believe at this point widely acknowledged as factual, given that many of the details and circumstances seem very similar to your family story?
Well, for one thing, Jefferson is a much bigger figure within Virginia today. More people are, more people talk about him and revere him and go to Monticello. And Madison, even though he contributed, I think, even more than Jefferson did, has sort of fallen in the shadows of Jefferson and Washington in Virginia. So not a lot of attention has been paid to him until relatively recently. And then in 1998, when I believe it was the Washington Post, but anyway, when it was published that the DNA results had proven the long-held belief by the Jennings family that Jefferson had fathered Sally Hemings' children. That really just brought everything to a head and brought everything to a focus. And many, the older Jefferson family, I think, are still resistant, to this knowledge, or believing this knowledge. But the younger ones and much of the population of Virginia are accepting it. So I just think it's that Jefferson has just gotten more publicity for generations.
Sure. It makes sense. Christopher has one last question. What evidence apart from oral history exists, and what attitudes have you encountered in the scholarly historical community regarding this?
I think there is doubt among the scholarly historical community because I don't yet have DNA proof, and though I am working on that right now. But I do want to say that the people at Montpelier, the scholars and the historians and the archaeologists there, have always believed in me and my story And when I first met them, which was in 1992, excuse me, they were excavating the kitchen where I showed the picture. And they were very excited. They took me, Lynn Lewis was the chief archaeologist at the time, and she took me and said, let me show you where your enslaved ancestor, Coreen, worked. And so, Montpelier and the staff is very supportive, and they're the people who are closest to the evidence. They're closest to the whole story. So they're the historians and scholars that really matter to me.
Sure. Your fan club is here. Patricia says, congratulations to my sister church member, Bettye. And her question is, how did you get access, or how does one get access to search slave registers?
The census, on the census?
Yeah, she doesn't really specify, but I imagine that's what she means.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the best way to go through them. And they can be obtained on ancestry.com. And if you're in Washington, D.C., if you ever get to go to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, they have a wealth of information and documents, including the slave schedules. And I don't know if you can access them online now or not, while I believe the museum is still closed to the public. But I do know that they have those documents.
Judy says, "Thank you, Ms. Kearse. This was very interesting and informative." Shinwei would like to know, why would an enslaver buy a wife for his slave?
Oh, because he wanted to have children. Wanted to have children and put those children to work. And unfortunately, sometimes, not so much in my family. My family was able to stay together, but slaves were bred to produce offspring. Some of them were put to work on the enslavers' own fields, but others were sold for money.
Shinwei also asks, what was the process like to change their names back to Madison?
There really wasn't a process. I mean, well, I shouldn't say there wasn't a process. They didn't really have legalized names. So Madison was the first name that they could register anywhere as, as a last name. So if they were registering to vote for the first time, or to buy property, they could use that, the name that they had chosen at that point.
Got it. Julia says, thank you so much. So glad to learn about this. Edward says, outstanding. I have visited Montpelier and understood that President Madison and Dolly did not have a child together, but Dolly has a son from a prior marriage. I inferred that perhaps Madison could not have children. What do you know about this?
Well, many scholars believe that Madison was either impotent or infertile, or both. But, I'm evidence that that's not true. There have been suggestions through, a couple of hundred, well, I could do the math, but for a long time, that Dolly may have had miscarriages. And it was reported that her son, Payne, was allowed to, or insisted on, sleeping in the bed with Dolly and James. So that was not exactly helpful. And, you know, there's just some concerns that some rumors, now I'm going to admit they were rumors, that she may have used some crude form of birth control. She had, at that point, she had had 2 children. One of them died during the yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia, but she had had 2 children, and maybe she was just done with that.
Judith says, Betty, I'm nearly done with your book. I feel like I am within the story. Excellent. And that was from Chuck Shaw. Actually, Chuck, not Judith.
Oh, right. Hi, Chuck.
Phyllis asks, have you heard of other Black families with similar oral histories of being descendants of presidents, such as Jefferson and Madison, and perhaps from other prominent founding fathers?
Yes, and I've met descendants of Jefferson and Washington and Monroe's, who may be, I mean, I don't know if they're actually descendants of Monroe himself, but yes, and I've met descendants of Madison as well, who have similar family stories.
And so that actually answers 2 other questions. Are you aware of any other descendants from the Madison family slaves? Well, I guess not necessarily. So are you aware, I guess you just kind of did say that, didn't you? So are you aware of any other descendants from the Madison family slaves?
Well, I'm on a committee at Montpelier called the Montpelier Descendants Committee. And we are descendants of Madison slaves, not necessarily descendants of the Madisons, but they're descendants of slaves owned by the Madisons.
Gotcha. A follow-up question from Francis. Does James Madison have any surviving white descendants? And if yes, have you met any of them?
Well, he doesn't have any in himself.
Right.
But I have met descendants of his siblings, you know, several of them.
All right. Someone with the initial P asks, thank you for a very interesting historical journey. I think the states also have document archives. Well, I guess that was more of a statement than a question, but thank you, P. And then Phyllis also recommends here to find the slave schedules for the 1850 and 1860 US Census on Ancestry, you have to go to their card catalog and search. All right, I'll take your word for that, Phyllis. Phyllis asks also, why is Montpelier more open to finding other descendants? It seems Monticello is not that open.
I can only say that the people that I know from Montpelier are very committed to knowing the whole story. And in the summer of 2017, they opened a permanent exhibit called A Mere Distinction of Color, in which I appear, and you can see me and hear me, you know, in that exhibit. And it illustrates the important role that the enslaved people played at Montpelier in the lives of James Madison, in the success of the plantation, in prominence in Virginia, and in, you know, the writing of the Constitution. So I just believe they're committed to recognizing the important role that enslaved people and, you know, and their descendants have always played in this country.
Rob says, thank you for sharing your story. I was wondering, how sure are you that Jim is the same person as Shamrock. I'm not, I'm
Shadrach.
Shadrach, excuse me. And then, so why don't you answer that question first? He has a follow-up.
Well, I mean, we just have all this kind of parallel evidence that at least, there was a close relationship between Emmanuel, Jim's son, and Shadrach. So we're, like I said, the next step is to trace Shadrach's father. And, we hope to find out that that was James Madison.
Rob was also wondering, how does it feel to have walked the same grounds as Coreen?
I walked literally in her footsteps, and it was just really an amazing experience, to really be that close to an enslaved ancestor. I can just only describe it as just a profound, rare, special experience.
So Bettye, we're coming up on 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time anyway, and I've asked you 15 questions, if you can believe that. And so we've exhausted the questions in the Q&A. Thank you. Shinwei says, thank you for the insight into your family history. Karen says, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I suspect we'll have more comments similar to those. So Bettye, did you have any last words, anything you wanted to say to the group before we leave you?
Well, two things. I'll try to be quick as we really are running out of time. I want to emphasize what my grandfather said, and that was that enslaved people were remarkable people who possessed inner strength and a sense of hope, and who contributed mightily, to our country, to their talents. When enslaved people died, they did not take those qualities to the grave with them. Instead, they passed them on through the generation, including to those of us who are alive today. So we have those same qualities, the same inner strength, and hopefully, sometimes we've got to work on that sense of hope, but we should nurture those qualities, and so that we too can make contributions to our country, just like our enslaved people do. And I hope this can kind of help, especially our young people, to kind of steel ourselves against racism. Then the other thing I wanted to say is that if you're interested in purchasing my book, I hope you will use your own independent bookstores, because they are really struggling, especially now during the pandemic. And our independent bookstores have contributed so much to our communities.
Yeah, thank you, Bettye. And speaking, you talked about your book there and where people can get that. Rob wants to know, when and where can we see your documentary?
Well, it's going to be shown by the First Amendment Museum on March 18th. I'm sorry, March 18th. And so I would have to figure out how to get the link to people who are interested, because you can register and you can see it.
Mm-hmm. All right, I will look into that, and perhaps I'll forward that along to everyone who's on the call tonight. I'll see what I can do there.
Oh, there'll be one before that. I just learned that there'll be one on March 7th. Also, that will be sponsored by the Jefferson School in Charlottesville, Virginia. Yeah, that just came up today. But again, I have to find out how you can see it through them.
Understood. Understood. Great. Well, wonderful. Well, so Bettye, we've hit 8 o'clock. Wonderful turnout, almost triple digits. And I'm sure a lot more people will see this on demand. Great audience. Lots of questions, lots of comments. I love to see that. So I want to thank Bettye for giving us an hour of her time and being so generous. We greatly appreciate that. And I would just remind folks to keep an eye on your email box, your inbox tomorrow morning. I'll be sending an email with a link to this recording and also a link to a feedback survey. Please take 30 or 60 seconds, fill that out. Let us know what you thought of tonight's event. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Bettye. And I'm going to end the call in about 10 seconds. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Bettye. Everyone have a great night.